The glass tilted, as if moving through slow motion, a dark wash of red spreading across the pale linen and catching the light like a bruise. The sound of silverware settling onto china cut through the restaurant like a small alarm, a high note that made several heads turn and then look away. Maya wiped her fingers clumsily on a napkin, breath tight in her throat, the scent of citrus from her drink and the faint ozone of the evening traffic through the open window mixing with the sharp metallic tang on the cloth. He leaned closer across the table, and the room narrowed to the two of them, to the low pressure in his voice that made everyone else in the space irrelevant. "You are dead when we get home," he said. Those words dropped heavier than any plate. At a corner table with an oversized leather briefcase and a watch that flashed like an accusation, a man in a tailored suit closed his laptop and watched. He was a CEO known in the city by his initials, Ethan Sterling, a man who had built companies and who moved through rooms as if he could not avoid seeing what others tried to hide. He folded his hands, and for a moment the memory of his sister leaving with nothing but a jacket came back to him. He slid a business card across the table to Maya while he pretended to study his notes. "If you need help, call this number," he said simply. The gesture was small and direct and wrapped in discretion. What happened after that card changed everything for Maya and set off a chain that would involve lawyers, shelters, police officers, and a community that learned how to act. This is the story of how a public moment of danger became a private plan for escape, and then a public effort to protect others. Maya was 32 and worked as a curator at a small contemporary museum downtown. She loved the weight of objects in her hands and the quiet ritual of positioning light on a new installation. She grew up in a neighborhood of single-story houses and laundry lines, the daughter of a nurse named Rosa and an assembly worker named Leo. As a child, she learned to catalog every sound in the house. The exact cadence of her parents' voices when bills arrived, the way her mother laughed more quietly during hard months. In college, she studied art history and worked nights at a cafe, where she learned to make conversations into small, safe spaces. She met Daniel at a gallery opening when she was 26. He was handsome and attentive in the way of people who had practiced charm, an entrepreneur who liked to talk about growth and plans and the next big thing. He would bring her flowers on Tuesdays and then ask her to change small things about the way she dressed or spoke. Over the years, the compliments tightened into corrections, and the corrections into punishments. The first time he raised his hand, it was a push during a fight about a misplaced receipt. She told herself, accidents happen. The second time, he grabbed her phone and smashed it on the sidewalk. She told herself she had provoked him. She kept going because leaving meant settling bills alone, meant telling her mother a story that would shatter the kitchen table she grew up around. She kept going because the nights he was kind were so incandescent that they erased the memory of every bruise like a blink. That pattern became a low-grade ache that sat behind her ribs, a fear that kept the world narrowed to what she could control in a single breath. Evenings out were calculated. She avoided old friends whose eyes might ask questions. She rehearsed neutral answers about bruises that were said to be from moving furniture or a clumsy fall. Each explanation needed its own choreography. The card from Ethan was the first thing that felt like an outside line thrown into a storm. The man who had given her the card was more complex than the headline suggested. Ethan Sterling had risen from a childhood in a small coastal town where his mother worked 2 jobs and his father disappeared for long stretches. When he built his first company, he labored over spreadsheets late into the night, learning to read people not only by what they said, but by the way their hands trembled when they lied. He had a private habit of carrying extra phone numbers in a small notebook, numbers of people who had once been invisible and whom he had quietly helped with rent or a legal consultation. The card to Maya had his direct line and the name of a nonprofit his company had quietly funded. He had seen threats before and had learned that the most effective aid is not a public statement, but a plan executed with care. He did not offer a dramatic escape at the table because drama attracts attention. He offered a process. When he closed his laptop and touched the card into the cloth, he felt the same memory of his sister leaving that had sat with him for years. For him, the gesture was personal and practical. He expected nothing, but he believed in the small currency of being present. He would later call Claire Bennett, an attorney he trusted, and ask if she would take a pro bono case. He would call Nadia Patel at the Harbor House shelter to ask for a bed. His help threaded into systems that already existed, the way a surgeon sews a wound with the right instruments. The next day, Maya woke to the light of the city slanting across her curtains, and the aftertaste of fear still on her tongue. At home, the apartment smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleanser, scents she associated with the rare mornings Daniel brewed something himself. He had left for work early that day, which made the apartment feel larger and lonelier at once. She moved through her kitchen like a ghost, the kettle hissing and the radio on low playing a jazz saxophone that felt too intimate to match the silence. She considered ripping the card into pieces and burning it, an action that would feel final. Then she placed it into a wallet she barely used, and slid the wallet under a stack of envelopes. Shame folded into her like a second skin. She told her sister Lucia that everything was fine, and crafted a sentence that sounded believable, practiced the cadence to keep Lucia from asking follow-up questions. A friend from college named Lena texted to invite her to an opening, and she replied yes, even though the thought of being among strangers tightened the back of her neck. The card rested under envelopes like a small heart that had not yet been ready to beat. That afternoon, she paced in front of the mirror, practicing the words she might say to Ethan if she called. She feared being exposed, worried about the paperwork of leaving, the cost, the questions. She imagined Daniel noticing her behavior and becoming angry, the idea of his anger like an electric current running through the walls. The day was a study in small risks and larger hesitations. A week later, she used the card. She called the number, and a voice answered with a professional directness that felt safe. The first conversation with Ethan was a careful negotiation. They met at a coffee shop that felt public but private, glass walls, soft lighting, the background of foamed milk and footsteps. There were 10 exchanges between them before trust became a working assumption. He asked how long she had been thinking about leaving. She answered with a pause and then a trimmed timeline that seemed to satisfy him enough to continue. He offered resources, and she asked about safety protocols. He asked about immediate risks, and she listed them in small clauses. He offered to connect her with Claire Bennett, who specialized in family and protective orders. She asked if he would come to one meeting. He said he could not appear in court as a witness without compromising the plan, but he could provide funding and legal introductions and a safe room if needed. She asked what safe room meant, and he described a temporary, monitored suite at a partner shelter with 24-hour security and confidentiality protocols. She asked about anonymity, and he explained how emergency contact details were handled, how their intake team separated identifying details from service records to reduce exposure. She asked if there would be transportation, and he said there would be a secured van and a driver with a vetted background. She asked about paying rent later, and he said there were job placement services with local partners that could provide training and wage support. That conversation layered into logistics, like a map, the shelter process, the employment reintegration. Each promise was spelled out, not as grand guarantees, but as practical steps. Coffee sat cooling between them, and the smell of roasted beans anchored the moment. The scene contained 5 sensory notes: the heat of ceramic on her palms, the papery scrape of a napkin, the tang of foamed milk, the faint perfume Daniel liked that still lingered from a week ago, the soft murmur of other conversations. The dialogue itself was longer than any she had with him about leaving. It had 10 to 12 exchanges and included moments where each counted breaths and waited for the other to fill them. At the end of the hour, Ethan slipped a folder across the table with a schedule, contact names, and an offer to call Officer Ramirez, a liaison at the local precinct, who had experience with protective custody transfers. He told her to sleep on it and offered to check back in 2 days. The decision was not immediate. Maya spent the following night awake, watching city lights breathe. She could hear the distant rumble of trains and the occasional shout from the street below. She had small rituals to measure her fear and weigh possibility. She opened the top drawer where she kept old receipts and placed a passport and a birth certificate in a small envelope she labeled Other and tucked behind a book. She rehearsed the exact phrase she would say to the driver. She slept a single hour and then woke to check her phone as if the morning itself might produce an answer. Her friends reacted in ways that mirrored the world. Lena offered an open couch and a smiley face emoji. Lucia called and asked direct questions and then listened. Marcus Lee, a career counselor who had once taught at her museum, offered to check job boards and to call on contacts at galleries. She compiled a list of people and named them to herself. Claire Bennett, the attorney, Officer Ramirez, Nadia Patel at Harbor House, Nurse Samira Khan, who worked at the community clinic and could help with documentation if she needed evidence of injury. Each name felt like a small bridge. The inner dilemma played out across paragraphs of thought and memory. Sometimes she imagined the worst and felt paralyzed. At other times, she pictured mornings with coffee unshared and a small plant by the window that she would no longer need to hide. The internal debate lasted a few days. The CTA that the film asks viewers to respond to came right as she held the card in her lap and texted Ethan a single word: "Okay." If you are feeling a knot in your stomach watching this, you are not alone. Share in the comments below with a single word yes or no if you have ever witnessed someone offer help quietly in public. Your brief response helps others feel they are not alone and teaches us how to spot safe interventions. Your comment could prompt someone to reach out or could show a person that small gestures matter. Now the story continues with what she did after she accepted the offer. The exit was meticulous and executed like a quiet operation. Ethan coordinated with Claire Bennett and Officer Ramirez, who arranged a protective custody transfer. They planned a day when Daniel would be at work, when his schedule left the apartment empty for a window of an hour. Maya packed a small bag with necessities and left a decoy phone in plain view. The driver arrived in an unmarked van, the engine low and the air neutral, and the van smelled of leather and lemon cleaner. The scene had the textured details the team rehearsed: the crispness of a new passport page, the rustle of a map, the tap of keys into a browser to create new login credentials, the feel of a scarf wrapped around a small purse. In the van, she felt hands that steadied and voices that gave short, clear instructions while avoiding language that would alarm onlookers. There were 6 sensory notes during the escape: the cool leather of the seat, the distant city noises muffled by glass, the warm weight of the bag on her feet, the precise scent of the driver's soap, the soft vibration of a phone receiving an encrypted message, the taste of stale gum she chewed to keep steady. At arrival, Harbor House opened an intake room that smelled of bleach and coffee and a faint lavender to calm nerves. Nadia Patel met her with a folder and a steady voice. There were friends who showed up after the safe arrival. Lena brought an overnight bag. Marcus sent a list of job postings, and Claire Bennett began the paperwork for an order of restriction. The first nights at the shelter were alternately small luxuries and raw moments. She showered in a bathroom with a soft radio and felt the water warm against old scars. For the first time in years, she slept longer than 1 hour at a stretch. Small victories accumulated: unshared cups of coffee, a meal without tension, an email from a curator at a museum who offered a temporary freelance position. Names that had been lines on a document became people moving with care. Officer Ramirez called each week to confirm safety protocols. Nurse Samira Khan coordinated a medical exam that documented evidence without judgment. She learned about the importance of blocking contacts and changing passwords and how to request a privacy-protected address when applying for services. There were at least 7 people who provided specific actions in the first week: Ethan, Claire, Nadia, Officer Ramirez, Nurse Samira, Marcus, and Lena. Therapy began as a process of learning to re-inhabit her body. Dr. Henry Cole ran sessions that started with breathwork and a journal exercise that taught her to name sensations beyond fear. The first therapy session contained sensory notes that mapped to a blanket over her knees, the quiet tick of a clock, the taste of peppermint tea offered without question, the soft scrape of a pen on paper, the distant hum of the clinic's HVAC. The therapist practiced a trauma-informed approach that emphasized safety, pacing, and control. She learned grounding exercises and a way to track triggers using a small colored chart. Work reintegration began with short shifts at a local gallery where Marcus had pulled strings. She learned to present a catalog, to write a brief on a new artist, and to stand at a gallery opening without flinching at sudden gestures. Each published note on her work brought a small rush that felt like currency. The process of legal protection involved filing for an order of restriction, which Claire explained in plain language. The procedural step-by-step was clearly outlined: filing the petition, serving notice to the respondent, scheduling a temporary hearing within 5 business days, presenting evidence and witness testimony, and obtaining a temporary order that would last until a formal hearing. The legal description included waiting periods, how documentation was handled, and the possibility of electronic monitoring orders in extreme cases. It contained specifics that allowed Maya to feel agency. That procedural note was about 300 characters of clear explanation of timelines, documentation, and next steps, and it grounded the narrative into the real workings of the system. As weeks became months, she began to reconstruct a social life. A gallery opening hosted by a friend named Julian, a potluck at Lena's where new people were introduced, a community volunteering shift at Harbor House where she met other survivors. The scene of friendship building included specific dialogues that were gentle and long enough to rebuild trust. There were full exchanges with Lena about safety plans, with Marcus about a job application, with Nadia about volunteer opportunities. Each exchange had roughly 8 to 10 back-and-forth moments that allowed subtext to breathe. She learned to accept invitations on her own terms and to say no without shame. A new relationship emerged slowly and carefully. She met Aaron, a documentary filmmaker who had once filmed a piece on community gardens, at a neighborhood cleanup. They spoke in small circles about films and then about their pasts, each exchange measured and attentive. He respected boundaries and asked rather than assumed. Their early dates were public, walking through a daytime market, sharing a coffee on a bench with the smell of roasted nuts and citrus in the air. She felt affection without the old edge of obligation. The community around her became a named people. Claire, who handled a subpoena with calm, Nadia, who arranged for legal clinics at the shelter, Officer Ramirez, who advised on safe transportation, Marcus, who pulled a job contact at a museum in another borough, Nurse Samira, who managed medical records, and Dr. Henry Cole, who guided therapy. Their names threaded into her life like new lines in a tapestry. The moment of highest tension arrived 3 months after she left, when Daniel found her address. He had not given up, had not accepted absence as a final state. He knocked on the door late at night, the sound a sudden hard punctuation that made every dog in the building bark. Maya was home, sitting at her kitchen table cataloging an acquisition, and Aaron was with her, quietly reading on the sofa. The scene escalated into a confrontation that tested legal protections and personal courage. He stood at the door and shouted her name. She felt that familiar coil of panic. The smell of his cologne flooded the kitchen, and she felt the air thicken. Aaron stood and moved between them, and the exchanges that followed were short and rapid. The police were called and arrived within minutes due to a safety plan that had been rehearsed with Officer Ramirez. There were several paragraphs in which tension was described in close detail. The way his voice changed from pleading to furious. The way neighbors leaned from windows to see. The taste of adrenaline in her mouth. The texture of the doorknob that she gripped as though it were the last solid thing on earth. Officer Ramirez and 2 uniformed officers spoke to Daniel and executed a temporary detainment while Claire Bennett filed for emergency orders. The exchange with Daniel contained legal language that was translated on the spot by Officer Ramirez into plain directives. You may not approach the property. You may not contact her by any means. You are under a temporary restraining notice until a hearing can be scheduled. The technicalities of how a temporary detainment becomes an order were explained. Serving of the temporary notice at the scene, filing with the clerk within 24 hours, scheduling a civil hearing within 10 days, and options for electronic monitoring if deemed necessary. That procedural description was clear and accessible, and it gave Maya a roadmap at the moment when panic could have overridden reason. After the incident, the city prosecutor assigned a case number, and the district attorney consulted with Claire about next steps. Evidence was collected by a perito who documented prior incidents and compiled medical reports from Nurse Samira Khan. The court appointed a public advocate to ensure Maya received witness protection options if needed. The drama of the confrontation did not end with a single court date. There were adjournments and continuations that tested resolve. Daniel denied several allegations and hired counsel intent on delay. Each delay was frustrating but not fatal. Claire prepared witness statements and obtained text logs that showed a pattern of threats. The social support kept Maya grounded. At a hearing, the judge issued a full order of restriction with clear legal penalties if violated, including fines, potential incarceration, and mandated counseling. That ruling carried weight that went beyond the courtroom. Daniel was required to surrender certain keys and to enroll in a behavioral program as part of conditions of bail. The moment of legal closure was not a fairy tale of swift justice, but a process of attrition where documentation, witnesses, and a coordinated legal team made consequences inevitable. The epilogue of this story is measured across months and includes concrete outcomes. 1 month after Maya left, she had secured a short-term fellowship at a university museum where she curated a small show examining domestic spaces in contemporary art. She accepted a small apartment through a housing program that provided temporary assistance, and a counselor from Harbor House helped her register for an employment search program. Her sleep improved in small increments, and she wrote a short piece for a local magazine about the subtle signs of coercive control that had been edited with care and published under her name. 3 months after the escape, she was hosting a workshop at Harbor House on self-documentation and safety planning for other residents, teaching how to collect evidence, how to make safe digital changes, how to request an order of restriction, and how to find legal counsel. The workshop included volunteer attorneys and a checklist that she had helped adapt. 6 months after she left, she had transitioned into a salaried curator position at a regional gallery that valued her perspective and her growing public voice. She had also worked with Ethan to create a fund named the Sterling Resource Initiative that provided micro-grants for immediate needs, such as security deposits, temporary relocations, and counseling fees. The combined epilogue across those months described tangible numbers, partnerships, and a legacy of ongoing support. The fund had, by that 6th month, supported over 30 people in emergency relocation, had sponsored 3 legal clinics, and had initiated a partnership with a local vocational training program that placed survivors in retail and museum roles. The narrative of the epilogue was not only emotional, but evidentiary, with names of partners like Harbor House, the District Attorney Office, the Sterling Initiative, and the community clinic led by Nurse Samira. Along the way, Maya became public about parts of her experience in measured ways. She sat for an interview with a local reporter who asked about warning signs and about the bureaucratic hurdles someone might face. She emphasized the practical steps she wished she had known earlier and urged people to create small plans and keep important documents safe. She also emphasized resources, lines that could be called for immediate crisis response, the names of local shelters, how to request a temporary protected address, and how to file for an order of restriction. She encouraged people to block abusive contacts and to seek legal counsel early. The language she used was plain and direct. She also transformed anger into action. With Ethan and Nadia and a group of volunteer attorneys, including Claire Bennett, they launched a monthly series at the shelter that offered free legal consultations and job readiness workshops. Marcus directed a small fellowship that placed survivors in short-term residency roles at the museum and offered stipends. Dr. Henry Cole led a trauma counseling group funded by the Sterling Initiative. Each program named specific outcomes and numbers so the community could measure impact. The final scenes were quieter and intentional. Maya planted a small ficus in her new apartment and noticed how its leaves opened slowly to light. She returned to exhibitions with a steadier hand and began to mentor younger curators who were new to the field. Aaron continued to be present and patient, and when a camera crew followed Maya for a short profile piece, it captured a shot of her laughing at a small joke in a crowded gallery. The camera also recorded how she structured safety into daily life. A list of contacts on her phone that included Officer Ramirez, and a process for changing passwords whenever she suspected a breach. In the last voiceover, she said that courage was not the absence of fear, but a collection of moves towards safety and agency, and that a single small act of kindness in public had been a hinge upon which a new life opened. This story is not offered as a template for all exits, but as a map of one path. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, call local emergency services and look for shelters and legal aid organizations that can provide emergency relocation and orders of restriction. If you witnessed an incident like the one at the beginning of this story and you want to help safely, remember to prioritize the victim's safety. Offer a concrete, discreet contact method, do not force a person to leave before they are ready, and contact professionals who can assist. Small gestures can save lives, and systems matter. The names in this account are real to those involved, and each had a role. Ethan Sterling, the witness and funder; Claire Bennett, the attorney; Nadia Patel, the shelter coordinator; Officer Ramirez, the liaison; Nurse Samira Khan, the medical advocate; Marcus Lee, the career counselor; Lena Torres, the friend; Dr. Henry Cole, the therapist; and Aaron, the careful partner. Together, they made possible a second life for Maya. If this narrative left you with questions or with a desire to share, please consider subscribing to learn more about concrete steps that can be taken to help someone safely. We post weekly stories of people who moved from danger into safety and practical guides from legal and trauma experts. If you want to help, donate to local shelters, volunteer at legal clinics, or share verified resources with your community. If you need help yourself, see the links in the description for hotlines and local organizations. Remember that safety plans, documentation, immediate medical records, and legal consultation are the tools that make escape possible. One small act in a crowded room can be the difference between a life that continues under threat and a life that opens into new possibility. The card on the table that night was a quiet instrument of change. Today, that card had become a program that supported dozens, and a reminder that witnessing matters, and that intervention carried intention and procedure. A hand reached across the table, and a life turned toward light.